This indictment, if it ever came, now it has come, would be something that would be a collection of misdemeanors that would rise to a felony level. And so you see Trump now, we expect, based on our reporting, he's being indicted at a felony level for financial crimes based on how this payment was made and how it was communicated.
A former president of the United States, for the first time in history, has been indicted, will face criminal charges. We don't know the specifics of those charges, as Robert Costa has just outlined. Already, Trump's attorneys saying this is a mistake on behalf of the prosecutor.
But to be clear, this wasn't just the prosecutor's decision. The way this works is the Manhattan District Attorney will come to the grand jury, a group of people who have been listening to all of the evidence and all of the testimony, and he will seek an indictment from them. So this is the grand jury's decision to move forward with an indictment, believing enough evidence is there to indict this person, in this case, a former president of the United States.
I also want to bring in our senior investigative correspondent, Catherine Herridge. She has also been speaking with her sources. Catherine, what have you learned?
About the development with the grand jury in New York. Seemed a little off balance by the question, though he acknowledged they had been anticipating this development and had a plan in place if that were to be the case, but he was checking back to see what the next steps were going forward. Just for some larger context, of course, there are about a half dozen investigations that involve the former president. This one, of course, has come to the fore with the grand jury in New York, but there are a number of state and federal investigations as well, specifically the special counsel looking at the alleged mishandling of classified information after President Trump left office. And then, of course, the Georgia case, which has gained a lot of steam in recent weeks. That's the allegation that the former president was looking for about 11,000 votes around the time of the November election. So you have this whole collection of cases, but this one really coming to the fore. And in some ways, unexpectedly, it would seem, based on my conversation with one of the president's former attorneys.
Catherine Herridge, thank you. I want to go back to Robert Costa, and on that point, this vote to indict the former president of the United States, this caps a nearly 5-year investigation into Donald Trump. It comes just as he has launched a new race for president of the United States.
It's highly complicated for this district attorney because he's prosecuting on a city level a crime that he believed was allegedly committed, all while someone runs for federal office. And this case originally started as a federal investigation of how this money was paid during 2016 to see if there were any federal crimes committed during a presidential campaign. It is migrated to this level, to the city level, and this has been a highly controversial unfolding case for many years. You think about Mark Pomerantz, the former prosecutor in New York, resigned his position because he believed Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, was not moving quickly enough on this case, on a possible indictment. The former district attorney in New York, Cyrus Vance, decided not to indict Trump. Now Alvin Bragg moving forward with an indictment, seeking this indictment from the grand jury, and it's the grand jury's decision to move forward. Trump's lawyers have told CBS News repeatedly they will negotiate in terms of how this all plays out in terms of an arrest, should it happen. Now that it has happened, look for Joe Tacopina and Susan Nicholas, the Trump lawyers, to really go minute by minute how this will unfold, how he will come up from Florida or off the campaign trail to come to Lower Manhattan. I mean, Lower Manhattan, Nora, is right where they film Law and Order. I mean, this is where Law and Order exists in the city of New York. Police officers everywhere. It's been highly populated in recent weeks. I've been there standing on the street corner reporting for a long time. All the cops in Lower Manhattan in full uniform because they're wary of what could happen in terms of protests. The former president called for protests. He had the expectation of an arrest, and he called for protests. So there's real unease. A lot of officers on edge in New York about what could happen when Trump comes in to be fingerprinted and ultimately arraigned.
Robert Costa, thank you. And that's the picture that we are showing right there. That is the district attorney's office, I am told. And of course, Alvin Bragg has now become a national figure himself, as the former president has, in some ways, incited violence, has made Bragg a potential target. Security has been ramped up for the district attorney there in New York, as he is now the first prosecutor to lead an indictment of Donald Trump. I do think it's important to remember that Donald Trump has been twice indicted.
Well, twice impeached.
Excuse me, twice impeached, forgive me, and acquitted as well. He has faced numerous charges in the past, political charges of wrongdoing, and yet he has escaped accountability. This indictment is the next stage in trying to, according to those who believe he has committed wrongdoing, of holding him accountable.
And it's so revealing that this indictment, out of all of the legal challenges he has faced, the political challenges he has faced in Congress, it's ultimately his history as a business person, as a celebrity, his time in New York that suddenly comes to the fore at this stage of his life and his career. It's his association with David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, about these alleged associations with various women, about hush money payments made by his fixer, Michael Cohen, that of all the things we've covered over the years about Donald Trump, about his real estate life, about his political life, the Russia investigation, January 6th, and insurrection, the indictment that came today, an indictment that's historic, is about New York. It's about hush money. It's about his life before the presidency.
Let's bring in CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman. And Ricky, indicting a former president is unprecedented. Could this legally prevent Trump from running for president?
No. The fact that he may be indicted now in the county of New York, within the state of New York, which is Manhattan, does not have any effect whatsoever upon his running for president, nor does it have any effect whatsoever if he were to win the presidency. It is not that kind of a charge. Now, if he does become the president again, and he has been convicted of a felony, then the question may become one of impeachment. And of course, we do know this is a state charge, Nora. It is very different than a federal charge because he could not pardon himself if he became president of the United States again. He could only do that for a federal offense. So then the question would be, if you're looking at a possible impeachment, and now I'm like 3 layers ahead, you would be looking at—
Let's not go there yet. Let's talk about the actual case at hand and what may be. We don't know what the specifics of this indictment are, but what are some of the potential criminal charges that the president could face? Former president.
Well, as I say, is it a high crime or a misdemeanor? Some of the potential charges that he might be facing, we are led to believe, have to do with what Bob Costa was just talking about. It has to do with the payment of hush money to Stormy Daniels back in 2016, before the election. It may have to do with the payment of hush money to a former Playboy playmate, Karen McDougal, around the same time. And the reason that Alvin Bragg could go forward and ask a grand jury to indict on first misdemeanors, falsifying business records, that there were records within the Trump organization of paying back Michael Cohen, who footed the bill to pay Stormy Daniels, and the records themselves false entries about legal services against a retainer. How Alvin Bragg would ask a grand jury to up that to a felony would have to do with the fact that it may have been to conceal another crime, which would have been a federal campaign violation. There has never been a case like this. It is a novel theory, a unique theory. And the real question ultimately may be for a judge, or perhaps even an appellate court, of whether or not this theory will stand.
Among the routine steps of a felony arrest processing in New York include being fingerprinted, being photographed, maybe even being handcuffed. Read your standard Miranda rights. Will that happen to Donald Trump?
It will happen to Donald Trump, but not the way it usually happens. It will happen as it happens with many white-collar criminals, where they are allowed to surrender by themselves, that is, with their lawyers. Donald Trump will also be surrendering by arrangement with the district attorney's office, and he will be surrounded by his Secret Service agents, as he always is, because he's entitled to that protection as a former president. So, yes, he will be processed. He will have a mugshot. He will get a booking number. He will give fingerprints, albeit electronically rather than by ink. And ultimately, whether or not he will be handcuffed is a discretionary decision for the police, in this case, the NYPD. If he's with Secret Service people, there is no need to handcuff him, to bring him into the courtroom to be arraigned.
Our legal analyst, Ricky Kleeman, want to bring back in Robert Costa as we are talking about this historic moment. The former president of the United States, Donald Trump, indicted on this Thursday by a grand jury in New York after what is a nearly 5-year-long investigation. What does this mean for the former president? What does it mean in terms of his supporters? What does it mean in terms of the protests that he has called from? We're at an interesting moment right now.
A very interesting moment. In fact, I just got off the phone a few minutes ago with a Republican donor, and he said that all the major donors in this country have been quiet for a long time, waiting to see if an indictment would come. Why hasn't Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin got into the race yet, or Florida Governor Ron DeSantis? Of course, they're taking their time on a decision, but they all knew this variable existed in the Republican political space. Would Trump actually be indicted in New York, and how would voters respond, not just nationally, but especially within the Republican Party? We are at a crossroads politically right now. Will other Republicans, now seeing Trump potentially humbled politically, maybe in terms of his popularity, from an indictment, decide to get in? But others are waiting to see, does this give him more fuel for his own 2024 presidential campaign? Just at his latest campaign rally, he has been using his grievances about all of this legal scrutiny to propel him ahead in the Republican presidential polls. And his closest allies tell CBS News he believes this will only help him to consolidate his support.
It's interesting what you said about some of the other bigwigs in the Republican Party that have yet to enter the presidential race. And yet, this is considered perhaps the weakest of some of the other legal cases that the former president is facing, including one on the attack of January 6th, his efforts to overturn the election results in Georgia, and third, those classified documents in Mar-a-Lago. Many legal experts saying those are weightier than this New York case. And yet, because of the significance of what has just happened, the question is, will those Republicans on Capitol Hill stop defending the president? Up to this point, Robert, they have said that this is a liberal district attorney in Manhattan who is out of line.
It's hard to see which Republicans will suddenly break from Trump because of an indictment in New York, but you are spot on, Nora. This is a legal and political explosion today to have a former president indicted in the city of New York, but there's an ongoing federal grand jury on January 6th. There's an ongoing federal grand jury on Trump's handling of classified materials. And there's a special grand jury that just finished in Georgia investigating Trump's conduct after the 2020 election. Especially in Georgia, Trump allies feel that Fani Willis, the DA down there, she could move forward with her own indictment of Trump at some point in the coming weeks. We've spoken to Trump's lawyers in Georgia. They are unsure exactly what the district attorney will do. And Jack Smith, the special counsel, he is bringing in every possible Trump ally to testify, even going so far as to try to compel the former vice president of the United States, Mike Pence, to testify before a grand jury about his one-on-one private conversations with Trump.
Robert Costa, thank you. Let's also bring in our senior investigative correspondent, Catherine Herridge, who I know has been speaking with her sources. Catherine, what have you learned?
Well, Nora, a short time ago, I spoke with a longtime aide to the former president. He said that they're waiting to learn more about the actual charges in the indictment, but they're taking in what he described a fighting posture. They indicated that they believe the Manhattan district attorney had not acted properly or acted improperly in this case, and they're going to seek to find whether records, substantial and significant records, were withheld from this grand jury in their decision-making process. So that seems to be their legal posture heading into the next few days, a fighting posture, if you will, Nora.
But that wouldn't overturn an indictment.
No, but it shows that they're digging in terms of trying to push back against the charges, which you would anticipate with this former president.
Catherine Herridge, thank you. And Robert Costa, at this moment, we've not yet heard from Donald Trump. Is that correct?
We have not heard from Trump other than hearing from his own lawyers who have said that he has been indicted. So they've acknowledged it, but Trump has not yet spoken out on his social media platform. But we don't expect him to be quiet.
All right, let's bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett, who is also with us. And Major is someone who has covered Donald Trump for a long time and watched the political machinations. This is incredibly significant. Your take?
So, Nora, the great question would be, in America, does the rule of law apply universally? And does it apply in the case of a former president? That has been hanging over the country psychologically for the last week and a half, after President Trump said he was going to be arrested last Tuesday. The question, is this the case to indict a former president for the first time in our history? Is this the best case? Is this the most legitimate, clear-cut case? Well, guess what? The country's now going to have the chance to test that question, not theoretically, but practically in a court of law. And as Robert Costa said, you can count on former President Trump to be combative, not only publicly, but legally, to try to delay this for as long as he can and project himself, which he's already begun to do, as some kind of martyr to the justice system in this country, someone who cannot possibly be treated fairly. Now, the court of law will decide whether or not this set of charges, whatever they may be, are or are not legitimate. But unlike impeachment, which is an entirely political enterprise, this will now be based on the law of New York and the facts of the case. And yes, most of this conduct predated President Trump's arrival in the Oval Office, but there is some suggestion in the evidence about the payments involved that some of those might have been authorized or carried out by the president while he was president. That would certainly give a larger atmospheric reality to both the underlying charges and the president's conduct. And that will have not only legal but political ramifications. But to all this conversation we've been having, Nora, about what this will look like, I want to, if I can, try to give the nation a couple of analogies. Those of us old enough to remember the Elian Gonzalez case or the O.J. White Bronco. Both of those were covered minute by minute, aerially. Every single step was videotaped and recorded for all history. Get ready for that, because that's what's going to happen when this day comes and former President Trump leaves Mar-a-Lago, flies to probably a nearby airport, possibly Teterboro, New Jersey, and is escorted by motorcade with the Secret Service in tow for this arraignment and a bond hearing. It will be a moment unforgettable in American history with tremendous political and legal ramifications. The country's been thinking about it, wondering what it might be, wondering if it would ever come for the better part of a week and a half. Now it's going to come.
Major Garrett, thank you. And just to recap what we are learning, for the first time in history, a former president of the United States will face criminal charges. He has been indicted on felony charges in a New York grand jury in relation to the hush money case involving former porn star Stormy Daniels. Robert Costa confirming this news for CBS and speaking with his attorneys. What happens now?
This is a historic legal and political moment, but it is only the beginning of a legal and political showdown.
Robert Costa, thank you. We should note we do not yet know the exact charges that the former president has been indicted on. Our coverage will continue on CBS News streaming on your local news, and we're going to have a full wrap-up shortly on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell in Washington.
You've been watching a CBS News special report on the breaking news out of New York City. The Manhattan District Attorney has formally filed charges against former President Donald Trump. Mr. Trump is accused of falsifying records to cover up hush money payments made to adult film actress Stormy Daniels during his 2016 presidential campaign. Jessica Levinson joins us now. Jessica is a CBS News legal contributor. Graham Cates, who is a CBS News investigative reporter, joins us now also. Jessica, let's step back. In terms of these charges, walk us through that two-step again that you and I discussed just a moment ago when we were first hearing this, how charges that are a misdemeanor get elevated to a felony charge. How tricky of a play is that, and why is that important in terms of elevating these charges to being a felony?
I think it is a tricky play. So what we have here is the basis, we think, of the allegations will be falsification of business records. And that is a New York State crime. And the falsification is basically the former president reimbursing Michael Cohen, claiming that those are legal expenses, but in actuality, they were just reimbursements for the hush money payments. So when he stated legal expenses, they really weren't. He said there was a retainer agreement. Reporting indicates there really wasn't. And so that's where you get the falsification of the business records. And then the question is, how do we go from that, which is typically a misdemeanor, and kick it up to a felony? And you have to show under the New York Code that there is an intent to commit or conceal another crime. And that's where it gets a little bit trickier, because we are, of course, dealing with a state prosecutor here, but we're also dealing with the former president, who was, of course, a federal candidate. So do you use a state charge? There is a state election charge that deals with basically entering into a conspiracy to try and unlawfully get somebody elected or defeated. That's one option. Another option, which isn't used very often, but of course, all of this is not typical, is to actually hook that to a federal charge, to say that the falsification of business records was related, for instance, to the campaign finance violations. That would be a federal charge. We just don't know yet, but I will say that the case is, it frankly relies, I think, on some novel legal theories. It doesn't mean it's unwinnable. It doesn't mean there's no chance that they can be successful, but it means that there's a reason a number of legal analysts have said this might be the most difficult one to prove of all the cases pending against the president.
Right, and we should note we don't have certainty just on what the indictment is and what else is in the mix here. Graham, is Graham with us? Graham, you're down at the courthouse. What does it look like down there?
Well, there's been a real increased security presence. You know, just before news of the indictment hit, that's when a helicopter came by. You could see more officers outside. People were escorted out of the building right at 5 o'clock. And it began to become clear that something was going on. And then soon after, we figured out what it was, which was the indictment. Now, this is nothing compared to actually just a couple weeks ago when there were protesters here for an arrest that never came. But now the real thing is here, and the protesters aren't here yet. But there's sure a lot of police officers here.
And is there any indication of when official word might come out in terms of what exactly this indictment is, or what the pipeline is from the determination to the public in disseminating the actual information, so that the speculation that's been going on for weeks can actually be replaced with analysis of what actually has happened?
Well, first there's the way things normally work, which is that the indictment is sealed until arraignment, which is whenever they kind of figure out when the defendant can come in based on what all the schedules kind of work out and when it's safe. But what we're talking about is a former president and a presidential candidate, and it's kind of in the interim up to him to reveal whatever he wants or whatever his legal team wants about it, unless, of course, things leak out of the district attorney's office. But in terms of when we can get kind of the actual paper itself, the indictment itself, and read what it is, we're talking about the day of his arraignment.
Right. Okay. We've got CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge, who joins us now. Catherine, what have you learned?
A short time ago, John, I spoke with one of the former president's attorneys just as this news was breaking, and my sense was that he was taken a little off guard, seemed a little off balance by the news, but indicated to me that they had been preparing for what they thought was the eventuality of an indictment. I also spoke with a longtime aide to the former president who said that they were waiting to learn more about the exact charges, but their position in this case, and it's also a position held by members of the GOP in the House is that they believe there's been overreach by this district attorney, and they plan to show that in the course of any trial or prosecution. So they're taking a very fighting posture at this point, John.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. The CBS News Washington correspondent Major Garrett also joins us now. Major, as Catherine reported, a fighting posture that's not unfamiliar with Donald Trump and your coverage of him. So what I wonder, Major, though, is your assessment of the political response from the rest of the party. There is a moment where already a lot of people have denounced the Manhattan District Attorney, but there will at some point be actual charges for politicians to wrestle with, not in the abstract, but actual charges against the former president. How do you see this playing out in terms of the president's political support from within his party?
Well, the former president has done what he has historically done, created a set of expectations and a narrative around which this indictment will reside. The president has already suggested, if not stated officially, that he believes that he is being a victim, that he is being persecuted, and that this case has no basis in law or fact. Well, the indictment will answer some of that political rhetoric from the former president. And whatever the district attorney has assembled and the grand jury has endorsed in terms of an indictment will have to speak for itself. There's a term that prosecutors and even some defense attorneys use as speaking indictment, which explains not just the law, but the underlying facts of the case and why this case, in the question of is it worthy of indicting a former president of the United States, must be brought to the public bench. That's the burden for the district attorney in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg. Is this the case? And lots of people who have yet to see the indictment, but who have speculated about what the contents of it might be, are divided on that question. Is this clear cut? Is this the evidence that is necessary to bring these two charges, as our previous guest said? Even if it's clear, it would still be a novel interpretation, not only of state law, but its application against a federal candidate. And is a novel case, one that's not so clear-cut, one that doesn't have a substantial judicial history, the right one to bring? Well, the district attorney has made that choice. He says yes. The grand jury agrees with him. Now the public will have a chance, and the political sphere will have a chance to look at that indictment. What is alleged? What is the pattern of facts? What is the underlying law? And do they match up, worthy of a case brought against a former president? But I will give you this prediction, John, and it's already begun to happen on Capitol Hill among the Republicans. They will rally around the former president on this, on that basis, that it's a novel legal theory, that the facts are weak, that the law is obscure, and this isn't the case. Now, that also raises the question, John, would there ever be a case that Republicans would say is worthy to bring against former President Trump? Maybe not. Maybe yes. We'll have to see. One thing I would also observe, in the last 2 weeks, there's been a noticeable and justifiable interest in the doings of the grand jury and the Manhattan District Attorney. As significant, and possibly for history's sake, more significant, has been what's been going on here with a Washington-based grand jury and the special counsel Jack Smith, because that special counsel, in the matters relating to January 6th and the president's alleged mishandling of classified documents, there have been a series of court orders, and every single one of them has gone against the president's interests and the arguments made by his legal team. And that suggests here in Washington, John, that that special counsel is also moving aggressively forward. And there is a very deep expectation here in Washington that though this is the first indictment against former President Trump, and therefore history-making in its own regard, it may not be the last.
That's right. Everybody's political posture will be determined by at least some recognition that there may be more shoes to drop. Major, stand by. Jessica Levinson, I want to ask you, we are in this moment between now, an indictment is coming. We don't know the details of it. When do you think, I mean, I guess my question is whether we might be surprised, whether everybody has said this is a novel case, this is risky, it requires a fancy connection to elevate a misdemeanor and some high degrees of difficulty. But might there also be things in this indictment that might be a surprise that would suggest, okay, the district attorney has more than has been speculated about?
Absolutely. And frankly, for some reasons, I think a lot of critics of the former president hope that's the case, hope that we just don't know what we don't know. And I think it is entirely possible that he, frankly, built an even broader case, that maybe this is not just all about that single reimbursement for the hush money payments, or I should say multiple reimbursements. But there's actually a broader story here about the former president paying for and basically killing off stories that were bad for him in the lead up to the election, these so-called kind of catch and kill activities. And there may be things absolutely that we're not thinking about. So when I, sit and think like, how humble should I be about saying this is a really difficult case? The answer is quite, because we might be looking at a small slice of an overall picture here. And just to remind everybody, that's entirely normal. Grand juries operate in private, and nothing is normal about this. And we typically would not know anything at this point. And so, yes, I think it's a great question. And that's why this kind of dark side of the moon time, when we know something's going to happen, but we're waiting to see the actual indictment and the arrest. That's why this is such a guessing game.
And Graham Cates, remind us again the story of this grand jury. Everybody's had their eyes on it since former President Trump talked about possibly being arrested last Tuesday. Of course, that was speculation on his part. No one had actually said that. But catch us back up to date about this grand jury, how long it's been meeting, and what this last couple of weeks has been like leading up to this, because it's been under the white-hot glare of public scrutiny.
Sure. This grand jury has been meeting about 3 times a week for almost 2 months at this point, and they've seen a steady stream of former Trump employees and former Trump White House staffers. And a lot of the people who we've seen come in through these doors have been people who have some apparent connection to this hush money payment. But there's also been some other people who were just kind of around Trump at that time, and we don't yet know why they were being asked why they were being asked to come in here. And this investigation has actually gone back 4 or 5 years at this point, and it started with this hush money payment, and then it broadened. It became a sweeping investigation into Trump's finances. It wound its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and then they refocused back again on this hush money payment, looking at it again, the original thing that they were first thinking about, and apparently they realized this is the charge that we have to bring.
Graham, thank you. And we have a statement now from President Trump's lawyers regarding the indictment of President Trump. It says President Trump has been indicted. He did not commit any crime. We will vigorously fight this political prosecution in court. Already there, stating that this is a political prosecution. Major Garrett, as you were mentioning earlier, framing this in a political context. Major, remind us again of where this hush money payment took place in the course of the 2016 campaign. It came to a head in its last period around the time of that ABC surreptitiously recorded conversation with President Trump. This was a moment in the campaign where things were quite dangerous for then-candidate Trump.
Right. The president then candidate nominee Trump was in a dicey political situation because that Access Hollywood tape had become part of the national conversation. And the candidate, the nominee, Donald Trump, had to record a video apologizing, at least in part, for that. And there was, for several days, trepidation among Republicans on whether he could stay on the ticket or whether they wanted to keep him on the ticket. Now, it's worth pointing out that former President Trump, then as a nominee and as a candidate, has always denied that he had any sexual relationship with Stephanie Clifford, Stormy Daniels, as her stage name is known as. He's always denied that. But she was coming forward and threatened to say that they had an affair, and that might have added to this political drama, the toxicity of the moment for nominee Trump. And so this was arranged in that context, that a system would be carried out, led by Michael Cohen, who, as we all knew at that time, was candidate nominee Trump's fixer. What do fixers do? They make problems go away, and they do it in a way that shields the person for whom they are fixing the problem, in this case, Donald Trump. And so all of that transpired near to the election, which is one of the reasons outside observers have said this is not a novel case or a ticky-tack foul. this might have had something to do with the outcome of a presidential election. Had that information become publicly known, it might have changed voters' attitudes, and that might have changed the result, meaning it has very big consequences. Whatever the documentation file that went afoul, according to this indictment, we expect, of New York law in terms of recording business expenses, the underlying motive and the attitude around it was possibly to influence a presidential election. And those in favor of bringing this charge in the general commentary space have said, that's pretty heavy. So that's the context around, that's the timing and the context. And John, there is also some suggestion, and again, until we see the indictment, we won't know what the statement of facts and the relationship to the law are, but there has been some assessment from those who have looked at this case and are deeply rooted in all of its investigatory eddies, is that some of the payments made to Michael Cohen to compensate him for shutting this story down either were authorized or carried out when Donald Trump was actually president of the United States. Now, until that's alleged, we don't know if that's part of this case or not. But theorists who've looked at this said, well, that would be a heavyweight consequence also. That would take this out of the realm of a minor league case and put it squarely within conduct of a sitting president of the United States. So that's some of the context, both legal, political, and timing.
All right, Major Garrett, thank you so much for your insight. We're going to lose you, but thank you as always. Jessica Levinson, let me go back to you for a second. What's going to happen now? We've covered some of this, but remind me again, what dominoes start to fall here in terms of once this indictment happens, what we see happen?
Yeah, great question. And to pick up on what you and Major were just talking about, I think he zeroed in on something really important, which is the difference between public and private crimes, and a conversation, and this is a huge but if the former president becomes the next president once again, and if he could potentially be impeached for anything that we're talking about today. And John, I think the answer is that impeachment really deals with public crimes, crimes that only elected officials or people who hold some position of public trust can commit, but not private crimes like a DUI, for instance. And so one of the things, of course, we're looking at is to see what the DA fleshes out here when we do see the indictment. Now, to your question of what's going to happen next, well, there will be the indictment that will become public. We will know what the charges are. We don't know how much detail we will get on that indictment. There will be an arrest. And it's largely up to, I think, the parties involved as to how much of a circus this arrest is. Obviously, it bears repeating, we have never been in this situation before. We have never had a former president who is indicted and then arrested. And some reporting indicates that the former president wants to make it a bit of a spectacle, that he wants to be handcuffed, and that he thinks this is actually helpful for his base. I expect at that point, the president, he will be booked, his mugshot will be taken, he will be fingerprinted, he will not spend time behind bars. He could have a very quick arraignment, but I think for security reasons and other practical reasons, he really won't spend time in custody, and then he will be released. He will not spend time in jail. It's my strong expectation. We're talking about nonviolent crimes here. And then there will be the quote unquote typical motions. There will be pretrial motions, and we'll look to see how the case develops.
You mentioned the circus. Graham Cates is with us. Graham, what is you are down, if there's going to be a circus, it's going to happen very close to where you are. What's happening down there now at this moment?
Over the course of this conversation, more and more people have started showing up. There's a park about 50 feet from me, and you can see, here we go, you can see more and more people who are kind of checking out the scene, checking out the media. I see some protesters with signs that say Trump is guilty, and that's actually a group of protesters that have made their way to pretty much every Trump thing I've covered in New York courts, Trump-related things, including like Steve Bannon and stuff like that. They're already here. So it looks like the crew that was here 2 weeks ago is beginning to repopulate the park. And you can hear police helicopters and a real security apparatus coming into place around us.
And Graham, was there any indication before this happened, the moving of barriers, the upright posture of officers who'd otherwise been lounging before any of this happened? You would imagine that knowing that the circus is coming to town, that officials would have tightened up things a little bit.
Yeah, but, you know, it was fast. One of our producers, Ash, pointed out almost right at 5 o'clock, all of a sudden, it was like there hadn't been much going on all day. There was a lot of milling around all day. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like it got very intense. There was more police officers. There was the helicopter. And then we got news within minutes, really. It was like they obviously knew something was afoot before we did. Even if they didn't know exactly what.
Right. All right, Graham Case, thank you. Ricky Kleeman, CBS News legal analyst, is with us. Ricky, we've been talking about the president's predilection to turn things and successful use in turning things into a circus at various times in his career. Give me your legal assessment on, we can understand the political benefit for that. How does that play out in the legal context? And is there any way in which that might hinder him as he faces this new stage in his life?
I think that he has enough sense to know that when he goes inside a courtroom, he should act appropriately. So if there is going to be any quote unquote circus, the circus will be outside. When he comes to surrender, that surrender has been in the process of negotiation for quite some time, John, in the event of a possible indictment. So the Secret Service has been working with the NYPD, the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force. The surrender itself will, I think, be very quiet, that he will be taken either to the courthouse, the DA's office, or perhaps even an undisclosed location of a courthouse. He will be quietly printed electronically. He will be quietly given a picture or a mugshot, and he will be given a booking number. All of that is a rather dignified process, perhaps degrading, of course, for the person who is being processed. But then, John, comes the time where he will be brought to the courtroom. I do not believe that they are going to put the former president of the United States in a holding cell with anyone else. They will keep him separate, and then he will go into court. The question of handcuffs rests solely in the discretion of the police department, and I would think that with the Secret Service surrounding Donald Trump, as they must, it is their duty, that there is no need for handcuffs. If there is going to be handcuffs, it will probably be because Donald Trump would like there to be handcuffs, because he would like that photo. But outside of that histrionic, if you will, he would be brought into a courtroom, the charges would be read, he would enter a plea of not guilty, that is what they do at an arraignment. There would be really no real question of bail here. This is not an offense that demands the posting of bail. There might be some conditions of his release. It is possible, I suppose, that he could be asked to surrender a passport, but he's running for president of the United States, for heaven's sake. So he's not leaving the country. He is going to continue with his campaign. The histrionics, John, will be political. Perhaps they will be legal on the part of his attorneys. We have seen Joe Tacopina on various programs in the last week or two, and I expect that we will continue to hear from his lawyers unless there is a gag order.
Ricky Kleeman, thank you very much. I want to go to Scott McFarland, congressional correspondent down in Washington. Scott, the tremors undoubtedly are pretty strong down there politically in response to this historic indictment. What are you hearing?
The reactions are somewhat predictable, John, but the implications, those aren't quite as predictable. First, let's go to the reactions. Right down party lines. Several Democrats, including Jerry Connolly on the Oversight Committee out of Virginia, saying no one is above the law. Congressman Adam Schiff, who, of course, was on that January 6th Select Committee, saying that this prosecution, in his words, was fundamentally necessary to preserve the rule of law. Republicans taking the position they've been taking in the days prior to this news, anticipating a possible indictment. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina saying the indictment doesn't pass the smell test. Other Republicans calling this either outrageous or politically motivated by the Manhattan District Attorney. Let's put that aside, because members of Congress have been pre-acting to this indictment for recent weeks, that they're reacting tonight. right along the same path is not surprising. What does this mean, though, for Congress? Not too early to say, because we're already at a frayed moment in the parties' relationships on the Hill, and they have two big crises coming down the pike, and this isn't going to help them meet minds. They have a debt ceiling crisis looming. We're just weeks away. They have to come to some agreement. This is only going to fray relationships further. And we are reacting now to the latest school shooting, and there's some impetus on Congress, some pressure on them to figure out something to reduce school carnage. And here we are with another issue generated by the former president that promises to fracture relationships further.
Political Director Finn, thank you very much, Scott. Political Director Finn Gomez is with us. Finn, there's also a presidential campaign underway a little bit. Candidates also standing by the sidelines. Some of them, like Chris Christie, the former New Jersey governor, in New Hampshire, saying that if he's going to run, he might run a campaign essentially going after Donald Trump. This would be the kind of thing that he would put front and center as his campaign, but the other candidates might do the very opposite. What's your sense of how this affects the presidential campaign and Donald Trump's position in it?
I don't think, speaking to some of sources to other political camps and campaigns, their reaction has been primarily that it's not necessarily a surprise here. They've expected this. They think there's been a sense out of the DeSantis world that this would initially aid Donald Trump politically, but after a period of time, and after this becomes more of an issue and hovers more over the campaign, that some of those supporters, Trump supporters who are on the fence, may start to see this as too much baggage, too much of a distraction, playing into that sense of Trump fatigue, and it could mean that some of the support could go to other potential rivals. Of course, Ron DeSantis is the one that's closest in the most recent polls. He has not, of course, jumped in the race yet. He's expected to after his legislative session is over in Tallahassee next month. But initially, right now, there's this expectation that it could help Donald Trump politically. John, if you remember, right after the Mar-a-Lago search, there was a sense of Republicans coming to defend Donald Trump, calling the Biden administration the sense of overreach. The former president himself put out a statement just a little while ago, saying in part that the Democrats have lied and cheated and stolen in their obsession to try to, quote, get Trump. But now they've done the unthinkable, indicting a completely innocent person in an act of blatant election interference. This is, of course, Donald Trump's statement from his campaign just a few minutes ago to CBS News. But again, it's a little early to say what exactly and how this will play out. There's also a sense, as you know, John, that even with these charges, even with these indictments, there's nothing that would stop Donald Trump from continuing to campaign. He could theoretically campaign from a jail cell. There's nothing that could stop him in that sense. But again, it's still early in this process. We're still seeing if the former president will even speak. There was some sense prior to this this news of this indictment coming out that he may give a statement on camera, or even there's one Trump advisor who said that he may even give a statement in front of the Manhattan courthouse. But again, it's early to say. We will see what happens next, John.
And it wasn't even that long ago that we had an example of a presidential candidate who was under indictment running. Rick Perry in 2016 was indicted. He said it was also a political indictment, and that was waved away pretty soon after he was indicted. But it was, in fact, the case that he was running for president and he was under indictment, as I recall. Thank you, Finn. We are continuing to follow the breaking news out of New York City. The Manhattan District Attorney has formally filed charges against former President Donald Trump. He is now the first former president to ever face criminal charges. Mr. Trump is accused of falsifying records to cover up hush money payments made to adult film actor Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential campaign. In a statement, Trump wrote, quote, "This is political persecution and election interference at the highest level in history." Catherine Herridge is with us. Catherine, what's the latest you're hearing?
Well, I've had a conversation with one of the former president's attorneys and also a longtime aide. I think to summarize, John, is that they're taking a fighting posture. They're organizing this evening about what the next steps will be. You can see in that statement you just read from the former president that he's very forward-leaning, and I think that's to be entirely expected. When I spoke to the attorney, they seemed a little taken aback and surprised by this development. And I think all of us can agree that in recent days it seemed that that grand jury had gone quiet for a period of time and that there might be more court action in some of the other cases. There are about a half dozen cases that are ongoing involving the former president. And as you know, there have been very significant developments in the federal prosecutions involving the special counsel here in Washington, D.C., I think most notably with the January 6th investigation and a decision that the former Vice President Mike Pence should have to testify before the grand jury, though he may launch a legal challenge, and that some of the former president's closest aides, including his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, would be required to testify to the grand jury. Meadows, of course, is very significant. He was the gatekeeper in the White House. He took a legal strategy that allowed him to essentially avoid cooperating or significant cooperation with the January 6th investigation on Capitol Hill. And many believe that he holds a lot of the answers as to what happened leading up to January 6th. There's also a sense that those federal prosecutions, whether it's January 6th or the mishandling of classified information, specifically obstructing the federal investigation, were cleaner shots, if you will, at the former president, because it is so historic to bring criminal charges against a former president. But that's not how it played out. It's played out with this indictment by the grand jury in New York. And I think that the former president and his team will make the argument that this is helping him in terms of reanimating his base at this point in the presidential campaign.
It's a very good point. And if you've got multiple legal challenges as a political matter, you want the weakest one to come up first as a way of
absolutely
defining all legal challenges as sharing the weaknesses of the first case. Although, and Ricky Kleeman, I'll bring you in here for this. I feel like we should have an asterisk in the upper right-hand corner of the screen that reminds everybody we don't know what the indictment is. We don't know if it's for a felony or a misdemeanor, or what in fact the facts of the case are. We know there is an indictment, but that's about it. And so my question to you, Ricky, is what a spot the DA is in, because here you have President Trump issuing statements. You're going to have basically every Republican lawmaker up and down the line denouncing the DA, pretty much. A few might say, well, let's wait for the facts to play out. But essentially, they'll be defining this case, what it's about, that it's politically motivated, all while the DA has to sit still, be quiet. How do you see that, and when might we start to hear some things that might actually give us some facts to actually analyze instead of just basically guessing at what's in this indictment?
Well, John, we have to remember that the DA chose the time. The DA decided that he was going to ask for an indictment today in the afternoon, late in the afternoon. He certainly surprised all of us. So in that sense, it was a masterstroke, because all of the major mainstream news media was saying that this case was going to be on hiatus for 1 month. So you have to give him credit for being very, very clever with his surprise. However, if we look beyond that, he had to think about what the publicity would be and how that might affect him or potentially his case. The indictment, unless it is leaked, and if there is a leak of this indictment, there will be an investigation about that leak. That indictment is sealed, it's brought to the courthouse. Theoretically, no one is supposed to take a look at that indictment except put it in the docket. It would not be unsealed until a court unseals it, And I assume that that would be at the time that Donald Trump self-surrenders to the police and the FBI, is gone through processing, and is brought into the courtroom. Now, that's the usual process. However, it seems in these Trump investigations that not everything is quite usual, John.
So, Ricky, before I let you go, and I know you have to go, let's put a fine point on that. The facts of this indictment are sealed, and it would be illegal for anybody to actually know, and that Donald Trump, despite his statements, doesn't know what's in this indictment either.
Well, theoretically, he does not know what is in this indictment. I don't know what arrangements the DA's office may have made with Donald Trump and his attorneys to apprise him of the charges, even without seeing the face of the indictment. John, I have been saying for a long time about this New York investigation that we are all speculating. The best speculation that we have has to do with the fact that Donald Trump's own lawyers have spoken on television. Michael Cohen has spoken on television. Michael Cohen has been a witness in the case. So we have every reason to believe that the case, at least in part, will involve the hush money paid to Stormy Daniels to buy her silence of an alleged tryst or affair just before the 2016 election. We know that a part of that from Michael Cohen has to do with falsifying business records. We know that that's a misdemeanor. We also know that it has been speculated that the misdemeanor will rise to a felony indictment on the basis of having to do with concealing a federal campaign violation. However, even with that speculation, we don't know if there is a count that is going to involve Karen McDougal, the Playboy playmate. Again, hush money. We also don't know, frankly, John, if they have resurrected the old Cy Vance case. He's the former, which was the case that had to do with bank fraud and tax fraud, which was what the New York Attorney General is going forward in its civil trial about. And that's what we heard from Michael Cohen a long time ago in Congress, and he pleaded guilty to. And we were dealing with the fact of what he told Congress was that Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization inflated values of property for the purposes of loans, deflated those values for the purposes of taxes. We haven't a clue if that is going to be part of this indictment. So all of this could be a surprise for us, I think, with the exception of the counts involving Stormy Daniels.
Ricky Kleeman, thank you very much for reminding us about all of that and for being with us this evening. Finn Gomez, I want to bring you back in if you're still down in Washington.
Yes, sir.
The other Republican candidates, there is Asa Hutchinson, who is possibly playing or thinking about running, has said we need to wait on the facts and for our American system of justice to work its way. But for a lot of candidates and other Republicans, there's a kind of litmus test in politics, which is that you have to weigh in. Ron DeSantis got some pressure for not weighing in on these suspected charges when it was all just a rumor. That you have to sort of make some kind of statement about what's happening now to Donald Trump. Do you see it that way? In other words, do all the candidates have to kind of weigh in, whereas in the old style of politics, you might want to just wait for things to happen and not get in the way of bad news for Donald Trump?
The interesting thing about former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson is just a few weeks ago around the gridiron, John, I did ask him a question if he thought he had made in this interview, he'd given this interview to USA Today, where he said essentially that that Donald Trump should step aside if he is indicted. I asked him that directly, and he said that to me as well, that he thought that Donald Trump should step aside if this would occur. What is happening now, though, is that there has been this reticence, if you will, from some of these political rivals to Donald Trump right now. And I think, to your earlier point, I think we are seeing that in some form, where they aren't jumping in and making statements right away. Some of them are waiting to see how it plays out politically. It's sort of a fine line, if you will, John, because of course the former former president still has a high popularity with a significant base of the Republican Party. There's about 20 to 30% who are pretty hardcore behind him. And, and for some, including the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, who, again, is the closest rival in recent polls, though he has not yet announced his candidacy. For some, for him, he is trying to appeal to that same voter. So it's sort of a tricky maneuvering, if you will, to try to appeal to that voter and still have this contrast against the former president. But in this case, because we are, of course, in historical uncharted waters, I think they themselves realize that, and there might be some, maybe some overthinking and strategy sessions that are happening right now. One in how to engage with this. One rival, one Republican rival to the president, 2024 rival, one of his senior aides just texted me back and basically my response, seeking a response, and he said to me, nothing really has changed. Trump just went from going to be indicted to actually indicted. And that to them is to me, it sort of encapsulates this sort of wait and see approach and how they will play this in historically unprecedented situation, John.
That's right. Everybody, it seems, has an obligation or has a choice, I should say, including all of us, to, you talked about uncharted waters. There are those who will choose to do what they can to keep the waters as calm as possible and those who will seek to churn them up. And that decision is now that this becomes more real is on everybody's plate. Let me bring in Scott Frederickson. He joins us now. He's a former federal prosecutor. Scott, what are the prosecutors doing at this moment? I mean, just in terms of is it the calm before the storm? Is it the beginning of the storm? What are they thinking?
It's the veritable beginning of the storm. Right now, they're preparing all the necessary paperwork and the arrangements by which the former president will be arraigned in New York. They're likely negotiating with the former president's counsel on how that will happen. It won't be the way a typical person who's indicted gets arraigned, either arrested or shows up and then shown in and kind of unceremoniously fingerprinted and photographed. They're going to, in all likelihood, arrange for so much of this to happen in private, away from cameras and publicity. So I suspect they're doing everything in connection with that. They've done all the work for their grand jury and witnesses, one would think, by now. So right now it's getting ready for the arraignment and then the motions, the challenges to the charges that will follow shortly thereafter.
All right, Scott Frederickson, thank you so much. Now I want to go back to Scott MacFarlane, CBS News congressional correspondent. What do you got, Scott?
Well, first of all, a Truth Social post from the former president calling those who indicted the 45th president, quote, thugs and radical left monsters as his first reaction on his social platform to this. It's worth keeping in mind as all this plays out in Manhattan, there is a congressional proxy battle over this criminal case underway. 3 Republican U.S. House chairmen have called Alvin Bragg to come to Congress to testify, to share communications and share information about his case. That was called highly improper from congressional Democrats who say it's an interference with the grand jury investigation. Republicans have sought here in Congress to villainize either the prosecution or Alvin Bragg himself. Bragg and the prosecution were getting defense, a pass blocking of sort from congressional Democrats. That will continue as an indictment continues in New York. We expect when Congress returns here from a 2-week recess that they will take up this matter. The House committees might try to move more aggressively now that an indictment has been handed up. But I'll also note this. It's not a trivial point, but it is a footnote, John. Congress hightailed it out of town here minutes before this news broke, and they are playing catch-up via press release as the night goes on.
Scott MacFarlane, thank you. Graham Cates is down at the in Lower Manhattan in front of the courthouse. Graham, first of all, the ambient temperature check-in with you about protesters or lack of same down where you are, but then also remind us who Alvin Bragg is.
Sure. So, more and more people are showing up, but it's still not a huge crowd. Alvin Bragg is a pretty new DA. He's been here for about a year. He's New York County's first black DA. He's only the fourth DA in almost a century here. This is definitely by far his biggest case in his short tenure here at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. He's actually, before he was elected, he ran against 9 or 10 other people, and I spoke to all of them about the potential for having to run an investigation or a case against Donald Trump, because this investigation started under his predecessor, Cyrus Vance Jr. And we had a kind of a long, candid conversation about the different things he could go after, and there was this fascinating moment that at the time didn't seem like a big deal, but in retrospect does, where he actually unprompted brought up Michael Cohen, who appears to be the key witness in this case. He said, we haven't talked about Michael Cohen yet, and then described what was the federal case involving Cohen, in which Donald Trump appeared to be referenced as an unindicted co-conspirator. And he said, when I looked at that case and I looked at media reports around that case, obviously not as a prosecutor on it, to me it looked like the reason that he wasn't charged there was prosecutorial discretion. He said, so I think that that's a case that at the very least appears like one that he described it as maybe charge ready.
Graham Cates, thank you. I want to go back to Catherine Herridge. One thing before, Catherine, you give me your latest reporting. It is worth mentioning that former President Trump has had so much surrounding his tour at center stage in American politics that people might look on this and think, well, this is just more fuss that surrounds Donald Trump. But this is something new. This is an indictment of a former president at a time where a lot of America's institutions and norms have been stretched and strained and are convalescing. And so while to some this might look like it's the same old fuss, it is a new chapter, and each step each of us take is in uncharted ground. But with that preamble, Catherine Herridge, what are you hearing?
Well, a short time ago, John, I spoke with a member of the former president's legal team, and as you can expect, a number of these surrogates and active members of the legal team are about to hit the airways to start what I can only describe and think to be a very synchronized and coordinated pushback against the news of this indictment. What he indicated to me is that they feel that this indictment reflects a system, a judicial system that's become highly politicized. Of course, we need to understand the basis of the grand jury indictment and the facts that were behind it. He also indicated that they plan to sort of do a forensic review, if you will, of this investigation to understand how the grand jury was presented evidence, whether it was presented fully. And I think the key phrase to me was the characterization of Michael Cohen and whether it was a fair characterization of his character. Reading in between the lines, that's a pretty clear signal to me that they're going to try and make this a lot about the character of Michael Cohen as a way to discredit the indictment of a former president. Separately, I keep coming back to the other cases that are encompassing this former president, and especially these federal cases. And there has been a sense in Washington that there's been a fairly quick progression with the special counsel investigation into January 6th. As you've been reporting on your show, the former Vice President, Mike Pence, the way has been cleared for him to appear before the grand jury. He may well launch an additional legal challenge, but a witness of that stature tells you that the special counsel is kind of reaching for the top of the tree now, right? Mm-hmm. They're getting right to the principal, or if you will, the target of that investigation. And then we have separately the classified documents investigation at Mar-a-Lago, which it's a secret process, of course, but based on the witnesses, especially one of the former president's attorneys being required to appear before the grand jury, and specifically notes from his discussions with the client, that certainly indicates it's shaping up possibly to be an obstruction case more than a mishandling of classified information. But those are two federal cases which I would argue really would have a broad, really resonating with voters on both sides of the political divide here. The challenge with this New York case, and again, we don't know the specifics of it, but the challenge is that it is at its heart, unless there's a lot of new evidence, a business records case, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's hard for a lot of people to get their minds around. And this seems to be the tone and the strategy that the Trump team is already taking here.
Well, and you raise a very important point, Catherine, which is that the special counsel in Washington is investigating events that are also more recent in time.
Correct. Thank you.
These events are, with respect to Stormy Daniels, are in the past, although, as Major Garrett pointed out earlier, there may be some behavior of former President Trump that took place while he was president, which would at least put it in the realm of his presidency rather than when he was a candidate or beforehand. Let me bring in Jessica Levinson. Jessica, Catherine Herridge was just talking about the Trump legal strategy such as it is. It's hard to know where the legal strategy begins and the political strategy ends or starts, but it was to attack Michael Cohen. That seems pretty textbook 101. You go with the weakest witness. Michael Cohen is an admitted liar. He basically made a career of lying. So why would he be telling the truth now? But on this question about going after the grand jury process, remind us again what the standard of proof is for a grand jury. And is there really anything that a defense team can go after? Or is that maybe more for public consumption than anything with legal standing?
I think a lot of this is for public consumption. And of course, what the grand jury is looking at is whether or not they think a prosecutor, if they go forward and bring these charges, can prove them beyond a reasonable doubt. So the grand jury isn't just thinking, you know what, I think it's more likely than not that these crimes occurred. The grand jury is saying, yes, go ahead, go into a courtroom, and we think you, prosecutor, can show that very high bar, that you can clear that threshold of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. John, you just mentioned Michael Cohen, and I do think that's an issue, that if he is, in fact, one of the key witnesses, if not the key witness, that he's a convicted felon. But let's remember that in open court, in federal court, and a federal judge accepted this, he said, here's what happened. Individual number one, and we all know that that's the former president, directed me to make these payments, and he did so to affect the election. And that's in part why I am agreeing to go to federal prison for campaign finance violations. So I think that it is entirely possible that the prosecution can rehabilitate Michael Cohen and can say, what would be his interest in lying at this point? Yes, we can say he has a vendetta against the president, but it's very rare to find that perfect witness. And in this case, again, we have Michael Cohen on the record.
All right, Jessica Levinson, thank you so much. And thank all of you, Scott McFarland, Catherine Herridge, Graham Cates, Finn Gomez. Thank you all for helping us sort through this. We will be right back with more coverage of the breaking news. I'm John Dickerson. You're streaming CBS News.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
It's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Technology is baked into the DNA of our generation.
Now streaming Chasing Fame.
I like being famous. I would love for my career to launch.
Is the hunt for social media popularity an opportunity?
To get verified is one of my big goals. If I get the blue check mark, it would open a lot of doors.
Or an obsession?
I spend a lot of time looking in the mirror because I want to look perfect.
Are the kids all right? Chasing Fame, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm here. Fire and rescue is out. They're doing wellness checks because people are trapped inside their homes.
How's the pay?
A lot better.
That's you and the Queen. That's beautiful.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Put me in the game, coach.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
The best interviews feel like it's just a conversation with a neighbor.
Hey.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask a question that is the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I'm feeling good.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I'll see you in the morning.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When it comes to the money you spend every day, we have you covered every morning. Making money makes sense. Weekdays on
Welcome to CBS News Primetime. I'm John Dickerson. We are broadcasting to you from New York City, where tonight a new precedent has been set for this nation. For the first time in our history, a former president of the United States has been indicted. A Manhattan grand jury voted Thursday to charge Donald Trump in the hush money payment scheme during his 2016 campaign. Mr. Trump will be asked to surrender himself to authorities. He will be fingerprinted and photographed, then face a judge for arraignment. This part is important. Details of the indictment are sealed by the New York City Attorney General, Alvin Bragg. We do not yet know the specifics of what the 45th president is charged with. He responded to the indictment from Mar-a-Lago, his estate in Florida. Unsurprisingly, Mr. Trump called it a political persecution and said he was innocent, which he is until proven otherwise. We'll have to travel to New York City he will have to travel to New York City, where the New York Police Department is out in full force, tightening up security around the courthouse as some protesters gather in lower Manhattan. We're going to begin our reporting there with CBS News reporter Graham Cates, who is outside the district attorney's office in New York City. Graham, give us a sense of the scene where you are right now.
So more and more protesters are beginning to filter in. It's still not a very big crowd. There's way more media than there is protesters here, but there is a heavy security presence. And this has been building now for about 2 hours since news of the indictment broke. And that came really shortly after the grand jury wrapped up its work, ending around 5 p.m. today. And now there's just kind of a lot of onlookers coming to see the scene. As many people, it looks like just seeing what's going on is actually here in support or against the indictment itself.
So, Graham, give us a sense of the timeline. What's the next most important element, and when will we learn what is in this indictment?
So the way this is supposed to work is an indictment is unsealed when the defendant is arraigned, and until then it remains under seal, which means that we don't get to know. But there is one part of this, which is that they could have described the charges to Trump's legal team, and then it's really up to them or Trump how much of it they want to make public. But we don't really know what's going to happen with that. We don't know how much of the indictment was actually described to the lawyers, if at all. So in the meantime, we're really waiting on Trump and his team to kind of have their way with this moment where he's been indicted. He's the first former president in American history to be indicted, and that's all we know. And he's the only one who's really allowed to talk about it authoritatively. The DA can't yet, until it's unsealed, say anything about it.
And while he may want to talk about it authoritatively, he will not have seen the indictment. It is sealed, and so everything he says will be like many things that he says based on his view of things, but not based on the actual facts of the case because he has not seen them.
Right, and so even in this case, our confirmation of the indictment came from his legal team. His lawyer told me about 20 minutes after 5 o'clock that it had happened. And so that's what I mean by authoritatively. Right now, that's basically how we got the news, is his legal team told us it happened. But the DA obviously hasn't confirmed it yet. And so really, for a little bit, for just that little bit until he has to surrender, the ball is in his court.
And Graham, remind us again why the District Attorney of Manhattan is the one we're all paying attention to right now in this case.
Right, so the Manhattan District Attorney's office has been running this investigation for between 4 and 5 years. And the newest member of the team, in some ways, is the current Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, who took over the case 15 months ago after he was elected. And they've started looking first at this hush money payment, and then it became this broad, wide, sweeping investigation into Donald Trump's finances. And then it refocused really just in the last half year as the trial of the Trump organization was coming to a close, and in which the company itself was convicted of charges related to falsification of business records. And right around then, this investigation started reheating up, and in January, the grand jury began to meet and consider these new charges.
All right, Graham Cates from Lower Manhattan. Thank you very much, Graham. I'm now joined by Major Garrett and Robert Costa. Major is CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent, and Bob is CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent. Major, I want to start with you. What now?
Well, what now is you're going to have a legal team on the Trump side telling the Manhattan District Attorney that this case has no basis in law. They may seek a venue change, take it out of Manhattan. They may say that the way that the district attorney handled the grand jury has some suspicious aspects to it. They're going to challenge this on every single legal front they can, which is the former president's right. You can expect a vigorous defense, both to delay and redirect whatever is said in the indictment about the underlying allegations and how it comports with the law. The Trump legal team will say, no, it doesn't fit within the law, and it doesn't fit within the fact pattern, in all likelihood, and it may not even be within the statute of limitations. The Trump legal team will look for every possible weakness in this indictment and fight each and every one of them tooth and nail.
Bob, we're in the middle of a presidential campaign. What does this mean for President Trump's presidential run, and what's your sense of the rest of the field and how they respond?
John, in the short term, we've seen a lot of Republicans, in terms of both the leaders of the party and rank and file, respond with grievance to the news of this indictment, expressing support for former President Donald Trump, rallying to his side politically. But long term, this is a political and legal variable. We do not know how this is ultimately going to affect the Republican presidential race, whether voters might eventually tire of former President Trump and his legal challenges. But for now, this is certainly fueling his argument that he is, as he put it tonight on Truth Social, under political persecution. And because of that characterization of this moment, he believes he can consolidate his support. Just in the last hour, speaking to some of his allies, they believe this could propel him forward. But they do know, as Major has detailed, that he is facing so much beyond New York. 2 grand jury investigations in Washington, D.C., led by the special counsel Jack Smith, as well as a decision in Georgia over whether he will be ultimately indicted there over his election conduct.
Major, when you reported your last book about the fragile state of the country with respect to the midterm elections and the presidential election, the 2020 election, rely on that reporting that you did to give us your sense of how this news gets processed by the country and its polarized nature.
John, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but this will have a very volatile effect on America's political dialogue. Everything I learned in reporting about what former President Trump said about the 2020 election, which was in every way, shape, and form a lie. The election wasn't stolen. Joe Biden was not a fraudulent president. There was not some massive effort conducted to deprive President Trump of a fair election. That election was fair, legal, and verified. But he said the contrary. And that was believed in large measure by his supporters for the simple reason that he kept repeating it. And in the last several days leading up to this indictment, what has the former president said? This indictment, when it comes, if it comes, will be political. And his supporters, therefore, believe it. There is a direct correlation and almost a call and response relationship former President Trump has with his supporters. He says it. They not only believe it, but they begin to repeat it, and in some cases begin to act on it. And that's what brings me to this question of volatility. The president has said he is a victim of a political persecution, and the country must rise up to protect him. How his supporters, some of them, interpret that and then act upon that is part of the volatility this country will confront in the coming days.
All right, Major Garrett, thank you. Bob, really quickly, was Trump caught off guard by this?
His lawyers had expected a decision to be made potentially in the coming weeks, but Trump allies tell us tonight they were surprised at the timing. Bragg held his cards close to his vest as district attorney.
All right, Bob Costa and Major Garrett, thank you both for your insight there about the politics of this. And we're now going to turn to Finn Gomez. He is the political director for CBS News. Finn, you've been talking to several senior Trump advisors. What are they telling you?
Yeah, current and former senior Trump advisors, and one that I spoke to, John, just a couple minutes ago, says that, echoing what Bob and Major just said, is that they believe that this is a, quote, net positive for the former president politically, that it reinforces all the narratives that he's been spouting, that the political class is out to get him. This advisor also predicts, the end of the quarter ends tomorrow, that the Trump campaign could have the best fundraising of the year following this indictment news, and possibly the best fundraising quarter of the cycle. Again, this is according to a senior advisor to the former president. But speaking to them overall, the sense is that, at least initially, this will help Trump politically, with Republicans circling the wagons, if you will, around the former president and calling out what they believe is a falling in line with the argument that the former president has been saying, that the Manhattan DA is formulating this sort of political persecution against him, and it could again, at least initially, help him politically. However, I did speak to some others from other Republican rival camps to the president, who say to me on background that they believe that this could also, in time, as we proceed through the cycle, this presidential cycle, it's still early, that some Republican primary voters could believe that this and potentially other indictments and the other investigations that are ongoing could have a detrimental effect on the president's chances to the nomination, and that you could see some supporters, consider other campaigns. And of course, it's still early, John, as you know. Ron DeSantis, who is expected to jump in later in the spring or early summer, has not, and he has been the closest in the recent polling to the former president. And there's others who are considering and weighing their own runs. So I think that, at least according to these Republican sources that I've been speaking to, that it could have an impact as we get further down the line. So we'll see how that plays out, John.
And we have a statement here from Governor DeSantis of Florida. The weaponization of the legal system to advance a political agenda turns the rule of law on its head. Respond to that, Finn, or tell me what you think. The House Republicans have called Manhattan District Attorney Bragg to account for the indictment even before the indictment was issued, and testify before them. He rebuffed their request. But what's your expectation for the majority House Republicans and how they'll react to all of this?
Well, I think a lot of the House Republican and House Republican leadership do get some guidance and direction from Mar-a-Lago, and I think you've seen that with some of these, some of the reactions and how they are politically beginning to look at the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, and I think that again, what you're seeing collectively as a whole right now is seeing the Republican Party circle the wagons around Trump. Some of them, politically forced to, if you will, to defend him and against the Manhattan DA. But again, as we continue down this cycle, does that still hold true? And does that have an impact on that hardcore base that is supporting the former Republican president and current 2024 presidential candidate? Will that erode? And as more people jump into the presidential fray later this year.
All right, Finn Gomez, CBS News political director. Thank you, Finn. We're going to take a quick break. We'll have more on the indictment of former President Donald Trump when we return. You're streaming CBS News Primetime.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the
And
past?
to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
Welcome back to CBS News Primetime. As we've been reporting, a New York City grand jury has voted to indict former President Donald Trump. The unprecedented act is a result of an investigation into hush money payments made on behalf of Mr. Trump to adult film actress Stormy Daniels during his 2016 campaign. We do not yet know what crimes the indictment formally accuses the former president of. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Jessica, just with that very much in mind, that we don't know what's going on, is it possible to say, or is this one way to think about it, is that DA Alvin Bragg could have a lot less than people are speculating he has in these indictments, or he could have more?
Yeah, we have no idea what is up or not up that sleeve. I think that is exactly right, John. So we've all been focused on this hush money payment and the idea that the former president repaid Michael Cohen for the money that he paid Stormy Daniels not to talk about this alleged affair right before the 2016 election. And we've been focused on, okay, he repaid that money. He said that it was a legal expense. It looks like it wasn't really a legal expense, and that has to be hooked to another crime in order to make that crime, the falsification of business records, a felony. But as we've been discussing throughout the evening, there could be other crimes that we're not thinking about as much. Let's remember that, of course, the New York Attorney General has brought a civil case against Trump and the Trump organization for financial actions, for basically lying about the value of Trump organization properties so that they got to pay lower taxes and then in some cases got bigger loans and better insurance. Now the DA's office could decide to revive that, and that could be part of this indictment. I mean, that's why it's such a guessing game for us at this point. It's entirely possible that the indictment doesn't actually include the Stormy Daniels hush money payment. I don't think that's probable, but it is possible.
So, Jessica, if I'm trying to keep this all sorted, it seems like there are three possible options. One is that all the DA brings is a misdemeanor case. Unlikely, but that's a possibility. The other is what you mentioned. He takes a misdemeanor, elevates it to a felony by saying that the misdemeanor was essentially he participated in the furtherance of another crime. And then the third option seems to be possibly something larger that we don't know about, that we haven't heard about, that has more complexity. Are those basically the three options we've got in front of us here?
I think that's exactly right. Bucket number 3 being that big question mark of we don't know. Now, we think that that bucket would likely include, because that was what Alvin Bragg's predecessor was looking at, Cyrus Vance, that would likely include the potential financial crimes, that tax fraud that we were just talking about, the banking fraud that we were just talking about, the insurance fraud. Also because Michael Cohen testified in Congress about those actions and basically left breadcrumbs for the New York District Attorney's Office. The New York District Attorney, again, under the past DA, Cyrus Vance, basically moved away from that case, but the Attorney General decided to move forward. I think that is the most likely in the sense of big question mark bucket number 3, as you outlined. I think that's what we're most likely potentially looking at.
Right. And Mark Pomerantz, who worked in that office under Cyrus Vance, left the office because Bragg wouldn't continue the previous work that Vance had started. So that adds to some complexity about that third option, which we don't know what's under door number 3. Let me ask you this question, Jessica. There was we spoke earlier that I think it was Graham Cates who said, well, it is possible for Donald Trump to have some inkling about the indictment if the district attorney's office gave him a heads up about what might be in it. How likely do you think that is from a legal standpoint? Is that something prosecutors do? And then assessing this, which is in a weird political legal space, how likely do you think it is that they tipped off former President Trump to the actual details of the indictments against him?
John, I'm going to be honest that I think the typical isn't going to give us a roadmap here. And I wish I could say, oh, this is what generally happens. But on the other hand, I'm really happy I can't say this is what generally happens, because you don't want all of our former presidents to potentially be facing criminal indictment and an arrest here. So did they potentially give the former president an indication of what was in this indictment? I think the chances are higher here than in other cases because you are dealing with a historic first. You are dealing with the former president. And there is, again, nothing that is conventional about this. And the best way for us to know if that happened is to listen to the way that the former president and those who speak on his behalf defend themselves and or attack the grand jury and attack Alvin Bragg. The best line, the best kind of breadcrumbs for us is to figure out which line of defense are they latching onto most strongly, and that will give us an indication if they know what this case is really about.
Right, a sort of pre-buttal based on their insider knowledge, if they have it. Jessica Levinson, thank you so much, as always, for helping us sort through all of this. Now,
thank you.
Now we got CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane, who joins us. Scott, how are lawmakers reacting to this?
Somewhat predictable, because they've been reacting to this before the indictment came. They were anticipating it because of the former president's statement, and they're reacting similarly tonight as they were days ago. There's Adam Schiff, former January 6th Committee Select Committee member, who says it's unprecedented, but so too is the unlawful conduct in which Trump has been engaged. A nation of laws must hold the rich and powerful accountable even when they hold high office. There are Democrats responding as well from elsewhere in the country. Congressman Jerry Connolly of Virginia saying nobody's above the law. Other Democrats from California echoing that, saying nobody's above the law. And Republicans have been fiercely critical of Alvin Bragg. Tom Tillis of North Carolina being the first senator to issue a statement tonight saying the indictment doesn't pass the smell test. And House Speaker Kevin McCarthy accusing Alvin Bragg of weaponizing this prosecution to mess with the presidential election. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office has just issued a statement tonight saying that they have contacted the former president's attorneys to coordinate his surrender to the DA's office for an arraignment, and the guidance will be offered on the date and time of that arraignment. The political ramifications of this have already started playing out because this was expected. We know Republicans have targeted Alvin Bragg for investigation in the U.S. House, including the chair of the House Judiciary Committee and House Committee on Administration. Democrats have defended Alvin Bragg's work and saying any criticism is an interference with the grand jury, which just indicted Donald Trump.
And we, in addition to the fact that nobody is above the law, nobody is guilty just because they've been indicted, which we should remind our viewers as well. Congressional Republicans have already vowed to investigate the Manhattan grand jury's investigation and the district attorney. How do you expect that part of the response to go in response now to the news that an indictment exists?
I expect them to make this a more primary focus and to amplify those criticisms. If for no other reason, it amplifies the criticisms of Donald Trump. These committees do have subpoena power because they are the majority. The Republicans are in the U.S. House, and these committees argue they do have proper oversight. But some of this, if not all of this, is political theatrics. The Manhattan District Attorney was fierce in his criticism of these requests from House committees, and he appears under no desire to come down here in Washington and testify about his work.
Scott, let's switch. We're obviously staying on this topic, but you know, you've covered so closely the attack of January 6th, the aftermath, and the changes that have taken place on Capitol Hill as leadership has to respond to national events from a security standpoint. What's the concern security-wise on Capitol Hill as the nation, as we hear news of this indictment?
It's a good question, John, because there has been unequivocal concern that this latest chapter in Donald Trump's possible candidacy for 2024 requires an enhanced security posture at the Capitol and here in Washington. In fact, just this week, the U.S. Capitol Police Chief asked Congress for a 14% budget increase to nearly $840 million a year starting in 2024. And the top Democrat on the committee with oversight here, John, says Donald Trump, the candidate, may necessitate a budget increase because, the Democrats argue, he produces this toxicity in the political dialogue, which can contribute to threats and security risks. This only serves to underscore that point, as Donald Trump calls for people to protest in the streets and calls this effort to prosecute him a dangerous one. It adds this dangerous element to a political rhetoric, which is already pretty sharp and pretty polarized here.
Scott, let me stick on that point, the polarized rhetoric. All of us have a responsibility in the wake of this moment to choose our words carefully. You've studied a lot of words and you spent a lot of time listening to members on the Hill. what is your assessment of the level of the rhetoric? In other words, there is a way to respond that lets the facts come out, and then there's a way to respond that is more incendiary. How do you assess the response from the president's party, the former president's party, on that continuum?
Their defense is so full-throated, and I can say from having been here about a quarter century covering the Congress, I haven't seen or heard a political dialogue this vitriolic and passionate as I've heard since January 6th. There was just last Friday a tour of the D.C. jail and the January 6th wing by House Republicans who came out of the jail and called those January 6th defendants political prisoners and denied an insurrection ever happened. Democrats walked out and said those January 6th defendants are privileged and coddled and that they are being treated quite fairly. That's just a snapshot in time of where Congress is over something caught on tape unlike any crime in American history, January 6th. And it begs the question, what happens next? If there's another prosecution by the grand jury investigating January 6th here in Washington, what level of toxicity will it further infuse into Congress's current dialogue and current existence?
And just to update viewers, Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, has put out a statement saying Alvin Bragg has irreparably damaged our country in an attempt to interfere in our presidential election. So in that one instance, you have the Speaker of the House drawing a link here to an interference with a presidential election to give you a sense of the amplitude that the rhetoric has achieved already. Scott McFarland in Washington, thank you so much, Scott. Coming up, we'll have more discussion and analysis of the historic indictment of former President Trump. You're streaming CBS News Primetime.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job?
I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
Welcome back to CBS News Primetime. I'm John Dickerson. A New York City grand jury has voted to indict Donald Trump. We do not yet know what crimes the indictment formally accuses the former president of. Mr. Trump was under investigation over hush money payments made on his behalf to adult film actress Stormy Daniels during the 2016 campaign. He will surrender himself to authorities in New York City before facing a judge for arraignment. Vanu Varghese joins me now. He's a white-collar criminal defense attorney and a former prosecutor. Vanu, so just start us out again here. What happens after the grand jury indictment? What are the next items in this chronology?
So the first thing to understand is that an indictment's a piece of paper that reflects the vote of the grand jury. Supposedly, it's supposed to be a secret proceeding, but in this case, not so secret. They will file that piece of paper in court. The district attorney will. They control the grand jury. And my understanding is they've already reached out to the Trump camp to arrange a surrender. Then he will be, just whatever day that surrender date is, that'll be agreed upon between the parties, between the DA and defense lawyers. Now, that's assuming Trump comes willingly. If he doesn't, then you have extradition issues and Ron DeSantis. Obviously, that can get very interesting from a political perspective and also from a legal perspective. Because if he chooses to fight this and fight extradition, and my understanding he's in Florida right now, the governor of Florida can fight the extradition attempt that situation.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but in fact, the governor of Florida has said, Ron DeSantis has said, Florida will not assist in an extradition request given the questionable circumstances at issue. And then he goes on to make some political points. So he has said that. So I just, picking back up with what you were saying, we don't know whether former President Trump will fight this, but if it gets to an extradition case, that is what DeSantis has said.
Well, let me clarify something. Ron DeSantis can make his statements, but ultimately it'll go through the court. So if he chooses to fight extradition, there'll be a trial judge who will hear the arguments for or against extradition. Then if the Trump camp is fighting it, then it'll go to an appellate court, and then it'll go to the highest court in Florida. From a legal perspective, there's really no basis to not be extradited if he chooses to fight. For Trump, the smart thing from a legal perspective is to voluntarily surrender. And then that means he shows up at 100 Center Street, a couple of minutes walk from here, and he gets processed. He'll get printed, fingerprinted, and brought to court. Perhaps they'll give him the courtesy of not handcuffing him. I'm not sure, or they will put him in handcuffs. I know he wants to go in handcuffs.
So from a legal perspective, the governor of Florida saying Florida will not assist in the extradition has no meaning in legal context at all.
Correct, because it's a judicial issue. It has to be decided in the courts, and it really is a challenge of, look, he can make things uncomfortable, and he certainly can try to do that. But I don't think, from his political perspective, I would think part of his appeal is to the rule of law, and he should step back and allow the courts to do what they're supposed to do.
I'm going to invite you to speculate and let everybody know that that's what I'm doing. We still don't know what's in this indictment. But in terms of the conversation that goes back and forth between the Manhattan DA's lawyers and the Trump team, give us some sense of how the bargaining takes place in that case. So, for example, I would assume that the DA would want former President Trump in New York to get this thing going as fast as possible. I would assume that then might give some leverage to the Trump legal team. I might have that totally wrong. But what's your understanding or sense of how that commerce starts to take place as they have a conversation?
So this is a unique situation, obviously, as you know, and as you've been talking about. Traditional logic goes out the window here. And I'm not sure if the district attorney in Manhattan really wants to move this forward as fast as they can, as they would normally do in a regular, indictment. I mean, normally by the time the indictment's filed, it takes about a month to get to court. That's the approximate time. And so he would then have to be arraigned in what's called in New York, and this is where New York is backward. New York calls its felony trial court Supreme Court. It does not mean it's the highest court in New York. It's just felony trial court. It sits at 100 Center Street. Some of its court rooms are at 110 Center, down the street from 60 Center, where Law and Order films The Steps, which is really just civil court, and also down the street from the federal courts. So it's been my view, and I've spoken about this, that this is not a legally sustainable indictment. You're talking about acts from 2016 that's well past the statute of limitations. I'm trying to think about how creative they can get here. They can say, well, courts were shut down because of COVID, and maybe that'll give them some time to, Governor Cuomo did suspend speedy trial through much of 2020 and 2021, the time, so they can maybe argue that they had some extra time, but really, they didn't, because other cases were being brought in the same time period. Or they could say he's in Florida, but they couldn't arrest him between 2016 and 20. But I don't think any of these arguments are going to be successful. And I ultimately believe, and you were speaking about him earlier in the last sentence, that this action by DA Bragg is in response to the book by Mark Pomerantz and the intense criticism that he took. Pomerantz was on CBS, on 60 Minutes, and on a talking tour, criticizing Bragg for not pursuing the real estate indictment or potential indictment based on Trump's inflation of his real estate values. So I think that this ultimately is Bragg's way of ensuring that he'll get reelected, which was really in doubt if he did not charge Trump. I think that's part of the problem here.
All right. Venu Varghese, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Historian Doug Brinkley joins me now. He is a professor of history at Rice University and a CBS News contributor. So, Doug, we've been saying, of course, that there is no precedent for this in history, but give us your sense of this moment and whether it attaches to any moment in our past.
I don't think it does. And we're all going to remember where we were when we heard the news that Donald Trump, a former president, is indicted. Now, we've had a lot of political brouhahas and crazy moments. I mean, Bill Clinton's impeachment, and Donald Trump was impeached twice. Watergate with Richard Nixon, when H.R. Haldeman and John Ehrlichman and John Mitchell went to prison, and Vice President Spiro Agnew had to quit the White House. But this is something very different. We have the prospect of a former president who happens to be the leader of the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, for the 2024 election, potentially demanding to be handcuffed and walking into, talk to a grand jury, talk to a judge. He's going to make campaign fodder out of this. It's probably the opening salvo of his reelection campaign. He's going to fundraise on it. And again, this fits into this major divide we have in our country. Trump is helped because Republicans are going to line up behind him and protect him, and Democrats are going to say, thank God that there's accountability for a president.
Right. So given your understanding of history, see if we can think through some of the players who might come on stage or who might not. So sometimes in the past, you've had the statesmen who have come forward and taken a moment of national challenge, which I think we would all agree this is, and have said, let me remind you who you are or who we are. Is that a role you see somebody playing? Are there other roles you see from history that we should look to see whether our leaders fulfill those roles or shrink from them?
Well, the narrative of Watergate is instructive in this sense. I mean, Howard Baker, moderate Republican from Tennessee, told Nixon he had to leave, while Barry Goldwater, conservative of Arizona Republican, told Nixon he had to leave. I don't see major Republicans in the Senate or Congress or governors in the Republican Party saying that, saying that Trump was playing around with a porn star and he deserves what he got and Trump should not run and he should disappear from the national scene. So in a very warped way, the real loser here is Rick DeSantis or Nikki Haley or people that are trying to track as the potential nominee. And as you just pointed out, the next month alone is going to be dominated on this indictment, with maybe 2 more to come. And Donald Trump said something, John, really interesting to Sean Hannity the other day. I've never heard, I thought I'd hear a former president, you know, they usually quote Lincoln or Jefferson. He was quoting Jesse James, the famous Missouri bank robber, and he was saying, you know, kind of alluding that he's an outlaw, Donald Trump. And we forget, because we're always comparing Trump to other presidents. There's also an outlaw tradition in America of the mafia and the Dillinger and Capone and Billy the Kid and Jesse James. And Trump is going to fall into that camp. He very well may campaign on a mugshot because he'll say the deep state is out to get me, and I'm the one who's standing up. And Bob Dylan used to have a line where he said, to live outside the law, you've got to be honest. You know, he made Trump take that rap that I'm the honest one, and all of these corrupt government, federal people, New York politicians are out to get me, and I'm going to win. The triumph of Trump yet again.
The question a guy like me usually asks a historian is, how will history think about this? But we're in the middle of history. So how should we restrain ourselves? In other words, to see the historian's point of view, which is to look at things over long periods of time. Help us maybe step back a bit.
I would look at January 6th as the precursor to all of this, and the fact that everybody wrote the obituary to Donald Trump. He was toast after January 6th, but he waged a miraculous comeback. He did suddenly people that were dissing him, like, you know, Lindsey Graham was back in his good graces after January 6th. And the hope is now, as of tonight, that we don't have violence, that there aren't going to be ugly protests at City Hall, or that the MAGA movement doesn't do something that might encourage some fringe player in their movement to create violence. But, you know, when you have Donald Trump holding a baseball bat last week, that's a symbol of war. It was bats or more to the point, sticks and you know, pickets and the like that broke through the Capitol on January 6th. And now Trump's holding a baseball bat. I know he's late. He made up an alibi for why he did it. But by and large, he's saying, you charge me, there's going to be a cost to pay. So we're going to have to watch that, how the public responds to this.
A lot of people feel like, and for good reason, we've never had this. We live in an age where we are saturated with new information, like we are in an unprecedentedly jittery and fragile time. But we also had the late 1960s, we had the Vietnam War, we had the Civil War. What is your sense of the perspective that we should bring to this, as new as this all is, in terms of what the country has been through before?
I always remind ourselves, and the point of history is that our own times aren't uniquely oppressive. I know we're all saying, oh my gosh, look what's going on in America, we're in decline and all of this. But as you point out, we've had a lot of dark moments before. I mean, during the Vietnam War, there were protests galore, but at the same time, 58,000 Americans are dying abroad. Now we're in the Ukraine, but we're not sending soldiers. Donald Trump is the most polarizing president in American history, period. But you know, we're going to muddle through this. Our system of justice is holding Donald Trump accountable. There may be some revisions. We've, as a class of people, historians, have been praising Gerald Ford for pardoning of Nixon, but now some people are saying that was a mistake because Nixon needed to have paid, because it only encourages people like Donald Trump to believe Nixon's maxim. Nixon famously said, if you're the president of the United States, it's not illegal. And that gets into Donald Trump's mind. So for President Trump, though, this is a night of embarrassment. I mean, he has a wife, Melania. Why would she want to hear about porn star or adult star Stormy Daniels every day? Why does the Trump family want to see pictures of her daily? And there is a lot of glee going on. The anti-Trump crowd in America tonight, they're celebrating that Donald Trump finally met indictment, the first indictment, and it's a felony, not a misdemeanor. And so, you know, we are now into if Donald Trump was just an ex-president, not the head of the Republican Party, this would look a little differently. But because he is still this hugely powerful figure this is a momentous night.
That's right. And the front runner, to the extent you can name one this early in the campaign. Doug Brinkley, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to take a quick break. We will check in with our team on the ground in Florida, where former President Trump remains after his indictment. You're streaming CBS News Primetime.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your money?
If you've got a match from your employer, don't give away that money.
Dollar Jill, y'all.
CBS Mornings, starting at 7.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals. How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder.
The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
He started out as a fun-loving party boy, but the alcohol got the better of him. What I envisioned was him being in some sort of medical facility. I just thought, what a great candidate for them to learn about the results of alcoholism and what it does to a body. But his body was sold to the military, specifically used as a crash test dummy in a simulated Humvee explosion. I was devastated. I had the box. I don't know if they were his ashes or not. I just held it as tight as I could, and I just told him how sorry I was.
Body Brokers, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream on the free CBS News app, Mondays at 8 p.m.
Former President Trump remains at his Florida resort in Mar-a-Lago. CBS News' Christian Benavides joins me now from Palm Beach. Christian, you're in Florida, a state Mr. Trump won twice, and it's where he's chosen to live out his post-presidency. What are you seeing? What is the mood, to the extent that you can divine it this soon after the indictment has been announced or has been news?
John, good evening. Let me tell you that, make no mistake about it, there will be supporters that are going to start lining up here shortly. Currently, we've got maybe about 6 people that are here on the bridge that leads into Palm Beach. You see Mar-a-Lago right behind me. And supporters, of course, following what happened in August of last year, really showed up here. You saw that. I mean, dozens and dozens of supporters, not just lined up here on the bridge, but also right in front of Mar-a-Lago, and we are anticipating that that will happen Right now, in the past 20 minutes, we've started to see some people show up. Right now, as I mentioned, it's quiet, but we've seen some people show up with flags. I see "Don't Tread on Me" flags. I see Trump flags, but only about 6 people. But as I mentioned, last year, following the search warrant that was executed, it took some time for the supporters to actually get here and show up. And the mood, of course, supporters are going to stand by Mr. Trump regardless of what happens.
And is there any presence of local law enforcement or anything like that to settle things, or in expectation of possibly people gathering and that kind of thing?
Definitely. There are a number of police vehicles. Palm Beach police is here, and they're sort of watching things for now. As I mentioned, everything is calm. This is just happening in the past few hours. But throughout the night, we are expecting that the crowd will grow. And tomorrow, we are expecting people will be out here. Remember, last week, there were people that were showing up every day, practically. But on Tuesday, when the president had said on his social media blog that he would be arrested, there was a rally at 3 p.m. and you had about 60 people that showed up at that time. So we'll see what the crowd looks like later on tonight. But there's always that concern of the former president, Mr. Trump, fanning the flames on social media and what that could lead to. Of course, we saw what happened on January 6th, and everyone's just sort of holding their breath here, just hoping to see what will happen in the next few hours.
All right, Christian Benavides in Palm Beach, Florida. Thank you. Let's bring in CBS News Chief National Affairs and Justice Correspondent Jeff Pegues. Jeff, what are you hearing from your law enforcement sources about threats, or just what chatter they're picking up in the system that they monitor so closely?
Frankly, John, they've been preparing for this moment for at least a couple of weeks since the former president, sent out that tweet. And what they've been doing is monitoring chatter online and chatter in other forums, just to make sure they're on top of any potential threats. And what we're hearing, at least right now, is that they aren't seeing any sort of large organized protest, anything like that. But of course, you will see chatter online, people making threats. The question is, are these the kinds of threats that the people are making that they can actually bring to fruition? And of course, that's what law enforcement is always most concerned about. It's that person acting alone that usually poses the greatest threat in terms of intelligence gathering, because they are the people who are hard to see coming. However, overall, the posture seems to be that law enforcement is preparing, but we'll have to see when the former president is processed and how things develop between this point now and then.
Right. And do we know whether the New York law enforcement was given any advance notice regarding the vote to indict the former president?
You know what, John? So many people were caught off guard by this today. In fact, there had been reports in some outlets that the grand jury was going to take a month off. So I think a lot of people sort of let their guard down, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't any coordination between the DA's office there in New York and the NYPD, which is 35,000 officers strong. I think, a lot of people don't realize how big that police department is in New York. People who cover the NYPD, it's almost like its own army, and they are very good at what they do, not only intelligence gathering, but the tactics they use with large demonstrations. So we'll have to see how they react to this. We know that officers or police officers are being asked to show up tomorrow in their uniforms, which will give the command staff there a chance to deploy officers to any sort of problem spot should they see some pop up. But at least right now, it looks like things are calm. And the intelligence apparatus in New York is working to stay on top of any potential threats.
Okay, Jeff Pegues for us in Washington. Thank you, Jeff. Here's a look at what we're covering in our next hour. A historic day in U.S. history, an indictment of a former president. We'll have the latest on the formal charges filed against Donald Trump. You're streaming CBS News.
people from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The first U2 show really was on this outside here.
Oh, right there.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and we go person to person with Bono.
Community is at the very heart of U2's music. There was magic, you know, that's all we had.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
If it's important to our nation.
Madam Speaker, I want to talk to you, of course, about abortion.
It's on Face the Nation.
How much money is it that you think you need to go ask Congress for?
The why behind the biggest stories.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS reports. As the nation of Hungary evolves toward autocracy,
if you define an autocrat as someone that the people can no longer get rid of, even when there are elections, he's definitely an autocrat.
some American conservatives like what they see.
Viktor Orban has done a tremendous job, and you've kept your country safe.
CBS Reports explores their growing alliance.
I have come to Texas. We should unite our forces.
So there are a ton of booths here, a lot of young people here.
And what it means for American democracy.
Prime Minister Orban is being accused of all kinds of things simply because he doesn't toe that liberal line. He stands for Christian conservative values.
To sum up, the mother is a woman, the father is a man, and leave our kids alone. Full stop, end of discussion.
A new conservative alliance, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
We're really excited that we've been honored with the Emmy Award for Outstanding Live News Program. But we know we couldn't have done that without you. So thank you. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7 on CBS.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
Welcome to CBS News Primetime. I'm John Dickerson. We are broadcasting to you from New York City, where Thursday night a new precedent has been set for this nation. For the first time in America's history, a former president of the United States has been indicted. A Manhattan grand jury voted Thursday to charge Donald Trump in the hush money payment scheme during his 2016 campaign. We do not yet know what charges he will face, but the district attorney is now negotiating Mr. Trump's legal surrender. And the former president